Captain Zane leaned over the command console, staring at the display of the fleet's course. The deep hum of the ship's engines vibrated through the floor, a steady rhythm that gave him comfort. He had been commanding the Earth fleet for years, navigating through battles, space anomalies, and endless challenges. There was little that could shake his confidence, especially when he had the support of a fleet that was unmatched in firepower. Something felt off. The fleet was heading toward the distant star system Z-35, a place on the far edge of the galaxy. This was a system that had been classified as dangerous by the Galactic Council. But dangerous to whom? The alien races that surrounded Earth had always talked about it in whispers, sending rumors and warnings about a powerful ship hiding in that system. Zane had heard these rumors many times, but he'd dismissed them. These were just the stories of scared, weak races that didn't know the strength of the human war machine. "Captain, we've just received another transmission," his comm officer, Lieutenant Jaya, said, her voice breaking through his thoughts. Zane turned to face her, raising an eyebrow. "Another warning?" "Yes, sir." Jara nodded, her face serious. "This one's from the Zara, a race we've had peaceful contact with. They've sent us a direct message." She hesitated for a moment before continuing. "They're urging us to turn around. They say there's something out there, something we won't be able to defeat. They say we've ignored the warnings for too long." Zane chuckled. The Zara were known for being dramatic, often sending cryptic messages about strange phenomena. His eyes narrowed as he listened to the transmission on the screen. "Human fleet, this is the Zara Empire. We warn you again, the ancient warship known as the Enduring Wrath still exists. It is real. You will not survive it. We have seen it in our history, and we have failed to defeat it. Do not make the same mistake. Turn back before it's too late." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving a silence in the room that was only broken by the soft beeping of the console. Zane shook his head. He'd heard these stories before, countless times, ancient legends about a human warship, said to be so powerful it could wipe out entire fleets. But there was no record of such. A ship, there was no evidence, only myth. "They think we're still afraid of fairy tales," Zane muttered under his breath, looking over at his senior officer, Commander Lyra. "Sir." Lyra began, but Zane held up a hand. "Enough," he said, his tone firm. "We're not turning back. These aliens have been spreading these rumors for generations, and we've ignored them all this time. This warship they keep talking about is nothing but a myth. We've fought bigger, stronger, and deadlier enemies. A ghost ship doesn't scare me." Zane turned back to his console, his mind already focused on the mission ahead. He couldn't afford to waste time on nonsense. There were galaxies to conquer, alliances to make, and enemies to defeat. Yet, as they moved further into the system, something felt wrong. The sensors were picking up strange signals, flickering patterns, impossible to decode, and there was a sudden drop in temperature, an eerie stillness in the space around them. It wasn't normal. Zane's fingers hovered over the controls. The fleet had come too far to turn back now, and yet, the doubt began to creep in, barely noticeable but impossible to ignore. Suddenly, the quiet hum of the engines began to pulse, an irregular beat. The console flashed with new date and nothing they had seen before. Zane stood up and walked over to the screen, his eyes narrowing at the unfamiliar readings. "What the hell is this?" Zane muttered. Lyra approached him cautiously. "Sir, we're picking up something." Zane turned toward her, sensing the unease in her voice. She was usually the calmest of them all, but today her hands shook slightly. "We've got a warship in proximity," Captain Lyra said, her voice now laced with a hint of disbelief. "The signals, it's definitely a ship." Zane's heart skipped a beat. For a moment he didn't speak, just stared at the readout. There was no mistaking it. The ship was enormous, its power readings off the charts. They were closing in fast. He turned to the crew who were all now watching him, awaiting his orders. The same crew that had laughed off the warnings, the same crew who thought it was just another alien scare. They were now looking to him for answers. "Prepare for battle stations," Zane said, his voice calm but edged with tension. "Set course to engage. We'll show them what happens when they ignore humanity." The crew sprang into action, but deep down, Zane felt something he hadn't in years. Was this really just a myth? Was this warship real? The doubts continued to swirl in his mind, but it was too late to turn back now. Suddenly, the entire fleet shook as a massive explosion echoed through space. The warship had fired. Zane's eyes widened as he saw the destructive force that the warship had unleashed. The blast wiped out an entire scout ship from another fleet, leaving only debris floating in space. Lyra's voice broke through the shock. "Captain, we have to retreat. This ship, it's not a myth. But Zane stood frozen, staring at the wreckage. His heart was pounding. It was real. The warship had proven the myth, and now they would face the consequences. The fleet drifted closer to the heart of the system, but the deeper they went, the more the feeling of unease thickened in the air. Captain Zane's mind raced, but his outward composure never wavered. It was what he did best, remain unshaken, when everyone around him began to panic. The strange signals from the mysterious warship had only intensified, making the usual hum of the engines feel almost alien. There was something undeniably wrong with the space around them, an unnatural stillness that crawled under Zane's skin. As they approached the heart of the system, Zane's eyes were locked on the screen. The warship that had been detected earlier was getting closer, its presence undeniable now. A massive, shifting mass of dark metal and glowing symbols. It almost seemed as if the ship itself was alive, breathing, waiting. What the hell is that? Lyra's voice trembled, cutting through the silence in the command deck. She had been standing by the comms, her fingers tapping rapidly as the system struggled to gain a clear scan. Zane's eyes snapped to the screen. The silhouette of the ship was now clearly visible, but the readings were unreadable. It shouldn't have been possible. The energy output was staggering, more than any known species could generate. The warship wasn't just old, it was ancient, its systems far more advanced than anything they had in their arsenal. This is impossible, Zane muttered, watching the impossible readings flood the console. It was too advanced, too far out of their league. Yet there it was, moving toward them, relentless, unstoppable. And now, more ships, smaller, faster vessels, merged from the shadow of the warship like a swarm of angry hornets, each one carrying the same deadly energy signature. The air in the command deck turned tense, the crew now fully aware that this was no ordinary enemy. "We have to leave now, Captain," Lyra said, her voice low, a note of panic creeping in. "This is beyond anything we've ever faced." Zane's hand rested on the console, fingers brushing over the cold surface as he weighed his options. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to retreat to the safety of their homeworld and admit that they had underestimated the warnings. But he couldn't do it. Not now. Not when he'd already gone this far. His pride, his duty, he had led them here. And there was no way he would retreat in the face of an ancient myth. "We're not turning back," Zane said, the words coming out with the quiet force that had become his trademark. "All ships, prepare for battle. No retreat." The crew looked at him in disbelief, but they followed his orders. The engines whined in protest as they accelerated toward the oncoming warship. For a brief moment, Zane caught the eyes of Lieutenant Jara, the girl who had grown up hearing stories of this warship. A myth told in hushed voices. She knew, just as he did, that this battle was a different kind of war. It wasn't just about firepower. It wasn't even about winning. It was about survival. Ben, without warning, the warship opened fire. A single beam of blue energy sliced through the space between them, too fast for the fleet to react. The closest scout ship, an ally in this exploration, was struck first. Its hull vaporized instantly. The force of the blast sent shockwaves that rattled Zane's ship, almost knocking him off his feet. The explosion was deafening, the silence that followed eerie and unnatural retreat. "Now," Lyra shouted, the calmness of her usual demeanor gone. There was no hesitation in her voice now, just raw fear. Zane's heart pounded, his thoughts racing. The blast had torn apart the scout ship like it was made of paper. The speed, the intensity, this was no myth. This was real. "We can't outrun it, Captain," Jara said, her voice shaky. "It's faster than we can react." Zane turned to her, his mind now working quickly, calculating the next move. He wasn't used to being cornered, not like this. But the truth was clear. They had underestimated their opponent, and now they were paying the price. Suddenly, the ship's shields activated, glowing a faint blue around their vessel. But even then, Zane could feel the strain on the system. The shields barely holding up against the sheer power of the warship's energy blasts. "We have to make a decision," Lyra said, her eyes locked on the readout. "We're not equipped to fight it head-on. We need to fall back and regroup, or we'll be wiped out." Zane stared at the viewscreen. The warship was now directly in front of them, its massive bulk blocking out the stars behind it. No retreat, no escape. There was only one option left. Fight, charge forward. Zane barked, his voice carrying the weight of a man who knew there was no turning back. "Engage all weapons. We'll hit them before they can strike again." The crew sprang into action, their training kicking in, but Zane could feel the fear. They were outmatched. They had known this would be a difficult mission, but they hadn't expected this. The battle began in earnest. The human fleet fired every weapon they had: laser beams, plasma torpedoes, missile salvos. But the alien warship barely moved, its shields absorbing the blows without any sign of weakness. The smaller ships darted around them, firing relentlessly, distracting them, overwhelming their defenses. "We need backup," Jera said urgently, her hands shaking as she scrambled to communicate with the other ships. But there was no backup. The rest of the fleet had been decimated in seconds. They were alone in the dark vastness of space, facing an enemy they could never have prepared for. The warship finally responded, sending another deadly beam, this time aimed directly at Zane's ship. The entire deck shook with the impact, and alarms blared as the shields flickered. Zane held on tight to the console, his mind racing. They couldn't take another hit like that. "I'm not going down without a fight," he muttered to himself, his hands gripping the controls tighter. They had ignored the warnings, and now they would face the consequences. The space around them seemed to stretch and distort, like a terrible dream they couldn't wake up from. Captain Zane's grip tightened on the armrest as his eyes fixed on the warship, its immense form filling the screen. The sheer size and power of it was staggering, impossible to ignore. Every flicker of its glowing symbols felt like a countdown, a signal that they were not just in a battle, but a fight for their very survival. Zane could almost hear the hum of the warship's energy as it powered up, each pulse louder than the last. The alien warship hadn't fired again, but its presence was suffocating. It loomed ahead, moving steadily in their direction, as though it was not rushing into battle, but savoring it. Zane's pulse quickened, but his face remained impassive. He had faced overwhelming odds before, but this was different. This wasn't just another battle, it was a clash with a legend. "Prepare the weapons for another strike," Zane ordered, his voice steady, though inside, his mind raced with thoughts of what had gone wrong. He had dismissed the stories, laughed off the warnings, but now, those very myths were staring him in the face, and he was beginning to realize how badly he had misjudged everything. A sudden tremor shot through the ship as a blast hit their shields, knocking everyone off balance. The sound was deafening, like the universe itself was trying to tear them apart. Zane's breath caught as he checked the damage report. The shields had absorbed most of the impact, but the force of the hit had sent a shockwave through the entire vessel. The crew scrambled to stabilize the systems, but the warship had made its point. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a force of nature shields holding at 60%. Lyra's voice echoed through the chaos, but even she couldn't hide the fear that crept in. "We can't take many more hits like that." Captain Zane nodded, his eyes narrowing as the warship moved closer. He could almost feel the weight of its gaze, an unspoken challenge from the ancient vessel. The warship had only fired once, but it didn't need to keep shooting. Its mere presence was a warning, a message that said, "This is what happens when you ignore the myths." The fleet had no chance of outrunning it. The enemy ships that had once seemed so advanced and dangerous were now nothing but prey. Scattered across the vastness of space, their defensive systems shattered in mere moments. The warship moved with an eerie calmness, as if the destruction was simply a part of its design. Zane's hand hovered over the controls as he tried to come up with a plan. They couldn't outgun it, not without reinforcements. They couldn't outrun it, not without risking everything. But there had to be a way to survive, to strike back, even if it meant playing into the warship's game. He wasn't going to die without a fight. "Activate the pulse cannons," Zane ordered, his mind made up. It was a long shot, but it was the only chance they had. The pulse cannons, while powerful, were still experimental, and Zane wasn't entirely sure they would even work as intended. But they had to try. They had to do something. The crew scrambled to comply. The pulse cannons charged with a low hum, their energy output rising as they powered up. Zane held his breath as he watched the readings. They were running low on time. The warship was closing in. If they didn't act now, they would be reduced to dust, like so many before them. Suddenly, a burst of energy erupted from the warship, cutting through the space between them like a knife. The pulse cannons fired just as the beam of energy reached their shields. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze, the two forces meeting. In a brilliant flash of light, Zane's heart skipped a beat as he watched the readings. The pulse cannons were doing their job, but it wasn't enough. The beam from the warship was still cutting through their shields, ripping into the hull. "Brace for impact," Lyra shouted, her voice sharp and urgent. But it was already too late. The shockwave from the impact sent everyone crashing to the floor, alarms blaring in every corner of the ship. Zane's head spun as he pushed himself up, his vision blurred. The ship was shaking violently now, the very structure groaning under the strain, but he couldn't stop. He couldn't afford to lose control, not now. They had to fight back. They had to survive. "Get us out of here," he growled, struggling to stay upright as his crew scrambled to regain control. "Do what you have to, just don't let them destroy us." The crew worked quickly, fingers flying across the consoles as they tried to stabilize the ship. Lyra was at the helm now, her face set in a determined expression. The warship was still out there, its energy signatures ominously stable. No signs of retreat, no sign that it was done with them yet. The ship groaned once again, and Zane gritted his teeth as the entire crew seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the inevitable. But then, something unexpected happened. The warship stopped. Its massive form hovered in place, as if it were studying them, as if it were waiting for them to make their next move. Zane's mind raced, his instincts fighting against the logic of what was happening. The warship had stopped its advance, but that didn't mean it was retreating. It was playing with them, toying with their lives. He stepped forward, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We don't have the luxury of waiting. It's trying to break us mentally. We're not going to fall for it." Jara looked up from the communications console, her voice trembling but strong. "Captain, we've just received a transmission. It's a direct message from the warship." Zane's eyes narrowed. "What does it say?" The words that followed hit him like a ton of bricks. "Humans, you should have listened. Now you will understand the true cost of your arrogance." In that moment, Zane understood. They hadn't just entered a battle for survival. They had stepped into a trap set long ago, one that was designed to make them face the consequences of ignoring a legend. They had ignored the warnings. Now they would pay the price. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving an eerie silence that seemed to stretch forever. The crew, stunned by the message, looked to Captain Zane for guidance, as if hoping he had some answer. But Zane stood motionless, his face ashen, his mind racing. The warship, this ancient force of destruction, had not only proven the myths true, but now it was toying with them. The warning was clear. They had been too arrogant, too dismissive of the legends that had haunted the galaxy for centuries. "We need to act fast," Lyra said, her voice breaking the tension that had settled over the deck. "We've got one shot left before they finish what they started." Zane's jaw clenched. "We can't let them break us. We've fought bigger threats before. This isn't just about survival, it's about proving that humanity is more than a myth." But deep down, Zane knew the truth. They had underestimated the warship. Every calculation, every plan had been based on the assumption that they were the stronger force in the galaxy. The truth was that the warship had power beyond anything they could comprehend. "Get us to maximum speed," Zane ordered, his voice hard with determination. The crew scrambled into action, but Zane's thoughts weren't on the controls or the ship. They were on the legend itself, the warship that had haunted the edges of the galaxy for so long. The stories of the warship were like ancient fairy tales. It had been said that the warship could only be awakened by the chosen ones, the last of an ancient race, humanity's forebears, a race that had been thought extinct. And when the warship was awakened, it would return to bring destruction to the stars. The Zara, the Vela, the Malevery race that had heard the tales of the warship had dismissed it as a myth. But now Zane realized, humanity wasn't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to reclaim the legacy of their ancestors. As the fleet moved forward, the reality of their situation began to sink in. They were no longer chasing a legend, they were facing it head-on. "We've been warned before," Zane muttered to himself, recalling the countless stories passed down through generations. "No one believed us. But now, now they will." The warship loomed in the distance, its glowing surface pulsing like a heartbeat. It had no need to fire. It didn't need to prove its power anymore. The fleet had already felt the weight of its presence. But now, something changed. The warship seemed to pause, as if contemplating them. Zane's instincts kicked in. "Hold course. Steady," he ordered. "We need to show them that we're not afraid." The ship's sensors began to flicker again, and for the first time since the battle began, Zane felt a wave of doubt wash over him. The warship wasn't just a weapon, it was a force, a manifestation of the myth itself, a physical embodiment of a power that humanity had long forgotten. The pulse of energy radiating from it was unnatural, beyond the scope of anything they had ever encountered. It was not just the technology, it was something else, something older. "We're outmatched," Lyra admitted, her voice trembling, though she tried to keep it steady. "We can't keep going like this. We need a plan, something that'll give us the edge." Zane nodded, not wanting to show how much he too was rattled. He had been the one to dismiss the warnings. He had been the one to lead them into this mess. But there was no turning back now. "Prepare the special weapons," Zane said. "We're going to take them by surprise." It was a risky move. Their weapons were experimental, untested in real combat. but they had no other choice. The fate of the fleet rested on them succeeding. The special weapons were designed to disrupt enemy energy shields, cutting off the power supply to vital systems. They wouldn't kill the warship, but they might be able to disable it long enough to make an escape. The crew scrambled to prepare the weapons, each of them working as quickly as possible. Time was running out. The warship was still out there, watching them, waiting for their next move. Zane's mind raced as he considered all the possibilities. They could fire the special weapons, but what if it wasn't enough? What if the warship was simply too powerful, too old, to be stopped by anything they had? The thought gnawed at him. They had crossed a line. They had entered a battle that was beyond their understanding. The warship wasn't just a ship. It was the embodiment of an ancient wrath, a power that had slumbered for centuries, waiting to be awakened. And now that it had been awakened, it was unstoppable. Zane glanced around at the faces of his crew. They were all waiting for him, their hope and fear reflected in their eyes. They had followed him into this battle, believing in the strength of humanity. But now, with the warship looming larger in the view screen, they were beginning to understand the true cost of their arrogance. "We're ready," Lyra said, her voice steady now, though the tremor of doubt still lingered. She looked at Zane, waiting for his command. Zane took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. The warship was out there, waiting for them to make the first move. But they had already made their move. They had ignored the warnings, and now they would face the consequences. "Fire the special weapons," Zane ordered. The ship trembled as the weapons powered up, the energy surging through the fleet. But before the blast could reach the warship, a beam of light shot out from its hull, faster than anything they had seen before. It sliced through space like a knife, cutting through the fleet's defenses with terrifying precision. For a moment, everything went silent. The energy from the warship's beam overwhelmed their shields, and the blast hit the fleet's lead ship, ripping it apart in an instant. The shockwave from the explosion sent ripples through the vastness of space. A cold reminder of the warship's power. Zane watched helplessly as the ship vanished in the blink of an eye, leaving only a scattering of debris floating in the dark void. "We're not ready for this," Lyra whispered, her eyes wide with horror. But Zane didn't answer. He couldn't. They weren't just fighting a warship anymore. They were fighting the myth, the legend, the very essence of humanity's forgotten past. And in that moment Zane realized that this battle was far from over. The silence that followed the explosion was suffocating. The debris from the destroyed ship drifted through space, the remnants of what had once been a proud part of their fleet. Captain Zane stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the viewscreen. The warship had done what it was designed to do. It had shattered their confidence, crushed their fleet, and proven that myths were sometimes more dangerous than they appeared. Zane's breath came in sharp, controlled bursts as he processed the magnitude of their situation. This wasn't a battle for survival anymore. This was a fight for their very existence. The warship, with its ancient technology and relentless power, was not just an enemy. It was the force of an ancient prophecy come to life, a force that had awakened to exact its revenge on those who dared to ignore its warnings. And now humanity was caught in the crossfire. Captain Lyra's voice was hesitant, but firm. "We've lost the fleet. We can't fight this warship head-on. It's too powerful." Zane didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned toward the communications console, his mind racing through their options. There were no reinforcements coming, no backup, just them and the warship. The enemy had played its cards, and now it was their turn to make a move. But what could they do? The warship had proven it could destroy their ships with ease. They couldn't outrun it. They couldn't fight it conventionally. And yet Zane knew that if they didn't act quickly, they would be the next victims of its wrath. "We're not finished yet," Zane said, his voice low but resolute. He paced the command deck, his eyes scanning the room for answers that weren't there. "The warship doesn't just destroy, it seeks something. There's a reason it came here." "What do you mean?" Lyra asked, confusion flickering across her face. Zane stopped pacing, his gaze fixed on the warship in the distance. He could feel the weight of its presence, pressing against the very fabric of space around them. "The warship didn't just attack us because we're a threat. It's not merely a weapon, it's a message. It's the last of something ancient, something that should never have been forgotten." Lyra frowned. "You think it's connected to humanity?" Zane nodded, slowly, his mind working through the implications of what he had just said. "It has to be. The legends weren't just stories. This warship, this enduring wrath, it was created by the ancestors of humanities, those who came before us. It was made for a reason. And now, the warship is here to reclaim its place in the galaxy." The crew stared at him, the weight of his Words sinking in. Zane wasn't sure if they were ready to hear it, but the truth had to be faced. Humanity wasn't just fighting to survive, they were fighting for their legacy. A legacy that had been dormant for far too long. The warship wasn't just a threat to their lives, it was a threat to their history, their future, and the very core of what humanity had forgotten. If the warship is here to reclaim something, Lyra said, her voice steady now, then we need to figure out what that is. We need to understand what it wants. Zane turned back to the console, his fingers flying over the controls as he accessed the ancient data stored in the ship's archives. He sifted through old reports, classified documents, and forgotten myths. The data was scattered, incomplete, but it painted a picture. The warship had been built by the first generation of humans who had left Earth. These humans, the ancients, had created the warship as a tool of vengeance. They had been betrayed by their own people, cast out and exiled from the galaxy, and when they were abandoned, they had built the warship, a ship designed not just to fight but to return and take back what was once theirs. Zane's heart raced as he pieced together the fragments of history. The warship wasn't just a weapon, it was a relic of a lost civilization, a civilization that had left a trail of destruction behind them. The enduring wrath was their message to the galaxy. You will never forget us. We will return this ship. It's not here to destroy us just because we're humans, Zane muttered. It's here because we are the descendants of the ancients, and it wants to remind us of who we really are. The realization hit Zane. With the force of 1,000 suns, the warship wasn't just attacking humanity, it was seeking its place in history. It wanted recognition. It wanted to prove that it, and those who had come before, had never truly been defeated. It was a reminder that humanity's past was far darker, far more powerful than they had ever realized. We can't let it win, Zane said, his voice unwavering. We can't let the myths take over. We need to fight back not just to survive, but to define our place in the galaxy. The crew stared at him, stunned by the gravity of his words. It was true. They weren't just fighting for their lives. They were fighting for the truth, for the legacy of humanity itself. Lyra spoke first. Then what do we do now? If the warship wants us to remember our past, what are we supposed to do? Zane looked at her, a fire igniting in his eyes. We'll remind it that humanity isn't defined by our past. We're not bound to the mistakes of those who came before us. We make our own future. Zane's voice was resolute, and the crew could feel the shift in the air. They weren't just on the defensive anymore. They were ready to fight, ready to reclaim their future. Prepare the weapons, Zane ordered, his voice carrying authority. We're not running, we're going to fight back with everything we have. As the crew scrambled to arm themselves and ready the ship for its next move, Zane stood at the helm, staring out into the black void. The warship was still out there, its massive form looming like a shadow, but Zane was no longer afraid. The truth had been revealed. The warship wasn't the end, it was a beginning, and humanity was ready to take control of its own destiny once again. The battle was far from over, and this time humanity would write the next chapter. The tension in the command deck was thick, every breath felt like it could be the last. The warship still loomed out there in the distance, its energy radiating with an almost palpable weight. Zane could feel the weight of it, pressing on him, from all directions. Every creak of the ship, every whir of the engines, seemed amplified, like the warship was somehow inside his head, watching, waiting for the next move. They had decided to fight back. There was no other choice. Humanity had to face the truth of its past, not as a forgotten race, but as something stronger, something better. They couldn't let the warship reclaim a legacy it was never meant to own. The ancients had built it, yes, but they had built it for revenge and humanity. They were fighting for their future. Zane's eyes scanned the viewscreen, watching as the warship remained suspended in space, unmoving. It was a strange thing, the way it hovered, as if time itself bent around it. He knew that they couldn't stay here much longer. Every minute they delayed, every second that passed, the warship gained more power. It was waiting for something, maybe for them to make a mistake, but Zane wasn't about to give it the satisfaction. Captain Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts, sharp and urgent. They're powering up. It's going to fire again. Zane didn't need to be told twice. He had seen the power of that first beam, the way it obliterated their scout ship with ease. If they didn't do something fast, they would all be gone. In an instant, activate the pulse disruptors, Zane ordered, his voice calm despite the storm raging inside him. These were their last resort. The pulse disruptors were designed to interfere with the enemy's energy systems, but they were unpredictable at best. They might just make the warship's shields weaker for a brief moment, or they could cause a catastrophic failure. but they had no time to think of alternatives. Every moment that ticked by was another opportunity for the warship to make them disappear. The crew worked quickly, fingers flying over consoles as they powered up the disruptors. Zane felt his heart hammering in his chest, the pressure of leadership bearing down on him. He couldn't afford to hesitate. He had to keep pushing forward, keep fighting, even if the odds seemed impossible. The pulse disruptors hummed to life, their energy crackling in the air like static before a storm. Zane's eyes fixed on the viewscreen again. The warship was charging. The first blast sent ripples of energy coursing through the black expanse, illuminating the dark space like a thunderstorm. Zane braced himself, gripping the console as if it were the only thing tethering him to reality. Now, Zane commanded, fire the disruptors. The pulse erupted from their ship, a brilliant beam of energy that shot across the dark void, streaking toward the warship. Zane watched with bated breath as the two forces collided, humanity's last hope against the ancient myth. The warship's shields shimmered as the pulse struck, but to Zane's shock, they didn't immediately disintegrate. Instead, the warship's energy began to fluctuate, like a star about to go supernova. That it worked. The shields were weakening. Get us closer, Zane shouted, adrenaline rushing through him. Don't give them a chance to recharge. Full speed. Ahead, the crew responded, moving with a sense of urgency. The ship lurched forward, engines roaring to life as they closed the gap between them and the warship. The enemy ship's energy began to stabilize, but it was too late. The pulse had done enough damage. They were within range now. Zane's fingers hovered over the weapon controls. This was it. The moment where they could either break free or be consumed by the warship's wrath. Firing all weapons, Zane said, his voice steady despite the chaos. Around him, the first barrage of missiles launched, streaking through space toward the warship. The explosion was blinding, the shockwave rattling their ship as it made contact. For a moment, everything seemed to hold its breath, the universe pausing, waiting to see if the warship would finally fall. But then, the warship's main cannon powered up, and for a split second, Zane thought they were done for. A brilliant beam of pure destruction shot from its center, cutting through the darkness with an unnatural speed. The ship rocked, alarms blaring as the energy hit their shields. The ship groaned under the pressure, but the shields held barely. Zane's heart skipped a beat. They had done it. The shields had held long enough for them to strike back. But the warship wasn't finished. It had taken the first hit, but now it was retaliating with a fury that would leave nothing behind. Raise the secondary shields, Lyra yelled. We can't survive another direct hit like that. The crew scrambled, the pressure mounting with every passing second. Zane's mind raced, but he couldn't allow himself to lose focus. The warship wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol of everything humanity had forgotten, and everything they now had to fight for. And if they were going to survive this, they needed more than just firepower. They needed to outsmart it, to show the warship that they weren't going to be another casualty in its revenge tale. A series of explosions rocked the ship as the enemy fired again. But this time Zane was ready. He ordered a sharp maneuver, pushing the ship into a roll that sent them spiraling away from the blast radius. The warship fired again, but this time, they were out of its line of sight. It was a desperate tactic, but it worked. We've evaded its blast, Lyra said, her voice trembling with relief. But it's closing in again. We can't keep doing this forever. Zane didn't have an answer, but his mind was racing. They were running out of options. The warship was relentless, but they had something it didn't. They had the will to survive. We don't need to destroy it, Zane said, a sudden realization lighting up his mind. We just need to disable it long enough to make an escape. Let's give it a reason to hesitate. The crew exchanged looks, unsure of what Zane had in mind, but they trusted him. They were running out of time. There was no turning back. The warship would either fall or they would. There was no middle ground. Zane looked at the warship one last time, the immense power radiating from it. Prepare to fire again, he ordered. But this time, target its propulsion systems. If they couldn't break it, they would slow it down, long enough to make their escape. The warship had made its move. Now it was time for humanity to make theirs. The warship was no longer just a looming threat. It was a challenge that burned into the very heart of their survival. The crew was exhausted, their hands shaking from the sheer strain of the battle. Yet they continued to fight, driven by a single truth: there was no choice but to win. The battle had gone on too long, the stakes too high. This was more than just a fight for the fleet. It was a fight for humanity's future, its legacy, and its place in the galaxy. Zane stood at the helm, his mind a storm of calculations and desperation. The warship was now damaged, its propulsion systems partially disabled, but not enough to stop it. The pulse disruptors had bought them some time, but not nearly enough. The enemy ship still held its course, its weapons fully charged, its shields nearly fully restored, but Zane could feel it. The warship was weakening too. It wasn't invincible. Its once imposing power was now fraying at the edges, and Zane knew that if they could just push a little harder, if they could keep the pressure on, they might just win this. We've only got one shot left. Captain, Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. If we don't finish this now, we'll be the next victims. There's no way we can keep this up much longer. Zane nodded grimly. The clock was ticking, and the odds were narrowing with every passing second. The warship had shown them its power, had reminded them that the myths weren't just stories, but real, dangerous truths. And yet, despite everything, humanity had not been broken. They had not bent to the will of the past. It wasn't enough just to survive anymore. They had to prove themselves. We have to end it now, Zane said, his voice low but fierce. This ends today. He turned to the crew, seeing the weariness in their eyes. The fleet was smaller now, the remaining ships scarred from battle, but they were still standing, still breathing. And that, Zane realized, was the key. Humanity didn't have the luxury of power. It didn't have the luxury of invincibility. What it had was resilience, the ability to keep fighting, to keep pressing forward no matter the odds. The crew quickly got to work, moving with a fluidity born of necessity. There was no time for hesitation, no time for second-guessing. Zane felt the ship lurch beneath him as they maneuvered toward the warship, their weapons primed for one final assault. The warship was charging again, its weapons humming with energy, ready to unleash destruction once more. Zane could almost feel the hum in the air, the power building, but this time, they were ready. Target its main reactor, Zane ordered, his voice steady. If we can hit it with everything we've got, we can take it down. The crew moved quickly, targeting the warship's vulnerable spots. Zane's fingers gripped the console, his heart pounding in his chest as they locked onto their target. This was it. There would be no second chances. The warship was too dangerous, too powerful to let live. They couldn't afford to wait, to hesitate. This was humanity's moment to define itself, to show that they would not go quietly into the dark. Firing now, Lyra said, her voice filled with a mixture of resolve and fear. Zane watched as the missiles, the energy beams, and the last of their weaponry hurtled toward the warship. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze, the two forces locked in time. The universe seemed to hold its breath as the weapons collided with the warship's shields. The impact was staggering. The energy flashed bright, so bright that Zane had to shield his eyes, the shockwave vibrating through the ship like an earthquake. But the warship didn't fall dead. It held steady for a moment longer, its shields flickering and sputtering under the strain. Then, with a deep mechanical groan, it shifted, its massive form beginning to fracture at the seams. The energy blasts had done their job. The warship was weakening, its power source destabilizing. But it wasn't done yet. The crew held their breath as the warship retaliated. Its main cannon fired again, a blast so powerful that it shook the very foundation of Zane's ship. The shields absorbed the brunt of the attack, but the force of it sent a shiver through the deck, rattling everything in its path. Zane's heart raced as he watched the damage reports flood in. They were still standing, but only just. Captain Lyra's voice was tight, filled with urgency. We need to finish it off now. The warship's reactor is unstable. If we don't destroy it in the next few seconds, it'll explode, taking us with it. Zane nodded sharply. It was do or die. They had come this far. Humanity had faced down the myth, and now they would be the ones to decide its fate. Do it, Zane ordered. The final volley of missiles launched, streaking toward the warship's exposed reactor core. Time seemed to slow as they flew toward their target. Zane's mind raced, imagining the destruction that would follow if they failed. But there was no turning back now. There never had been. The missiles hit their mark. The warship's reactor rupturing in a burst of energy so intense that it could be seen for light years around. The explosion was catastrophic, the shockwave rippling outward, sending a wave of force through the fleet's remaining ships. Zane held on, watching as the warship's once imposing silhouette crumbled, its energy flickering out like a dying star. For a moment, there was nothing but the lingering echoes of destruction. The fleet had won. The warship was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. Zane exhaled slowly, his body finally able to relax, even if just for a moment. The weight of the battle, the weight of the myths and the legends, had been lifted. Humanity had not just survived, had proven that it was worthy of the galaxy. We did it, Lyra said softly, her voice almost incredulous. Zane didn't respond immediately. He couldn't. Instead, he turned to face his crew, his eyes meeting theirs. They had fought the impossible. They had faced down a myth, a legend, and come out the other side victorious. They had fought for their future, for the legacy of humanity, and they had earned their place in the stars. Humanity's not just a myth, Zane said, his voice strong once again. It's a force to be reckoned with. And as the crew stood together, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter, as if the galaxy itself had taken notice of the humans who had dared to defy the myth.